Hey everyone, it's Matt the One Health Vet. Today I have a presentation that I actually gave last spring for my MPH program. The presentation will talk about regulating antimicrobial resistance and agricultural antimicrobial use. First off, I'll talk about antibiotics, resistance, and their uses in agriculture. Then I'll go into the relevant federal regulations. I'll discuss what we can learn from the experience of other countries, specifically the regulatory experience of Denmark. And finally, I'll give my own personal recommendations. Antibiotics are used as crucial treatments for bacterial infections in both human and veterinary medicine. Very generally, bacteria can be selected for resistance when they survive and replicate in the presence of an antibacterial agent, such as an antibiotic drug. The more that antibiotics are used, the more chances bacteria have to be selectively pressured towards resistance. The more that we use antibiotics, the more resistance is created. This is a very important concept. So what are we doing about this? Antibiotic stewardship programs address prescribing practices in both human and veterinary medicine. These programs center around the idea of judicious use of antibiotics. This is an important concept, prescribing the proper drug at the right dose for the correct amount of time. But what happens if a veterinarian is treating 10 animals, or 100, or even 10,000? And this may not be as uncommon as you think. This picture here is one example. This is a chicken broiler production operation in Florida, and as you can see, there are thousands of birds housed here, all of which may be treated by just one veterinarian. Let's talk a bit about how antibiotics are used in agriculture. The amount of antibiotics sold for use in food-producing animals was more than 4 times the amount used to treat human illness in 2011. That is a staggering statistic. I'll point out that I have to say sold for use because the FDA only provides sales data for these drugs used in animals. Additionally, the amount of antibiotics labeled as medically important that have been sold for use in food-producing animals continues to increase. Medically important essentially means that the drug is also used in human medicine. As you can see in this figure, the total amount of antibiotics sold for use increased by more than 3 million kilograms between 2009 and 2014. So why is this a problem? Antibiotics are generally used in agriculture for 3 purposes, and those are growth promotion, disease prevention, and the actual treatment of disease. When the antibiotics are used for growth promotion and disease prevention purposes, they are often drastically underdosed, and not all of the target bacteria are eliminated. This is what is called subtherapeutic dosing, and this is a major driver of antibiotic resistance. The CDC estimates that at least 20%, that's 1 in 5, resistant infections in humans are zoonotic in origin or come from animals. This can be through contaminated food or through what is known as environmental antibiotic pollution, of which people who work and live near food animal production facilities are at highest risk. So let's talk about the current regulatory setting in the United States. For surveillance of antimicrobial resistance, the U.S. has NARMS, which is comprised of the CDC, the FDA Center for Veterinary Medicine, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. There is also the Emerging Infections Program and the National Healthcare Safety Network, which also fall under the umbrella of the CDC. The FDA has produced several documents in an attempt to address the judicious use of antibiotics in food-producing animals, So we'll now go a bit deeper into each one. It's important to note that all of these guidances are just that, guidances. They are not law and they are not enforceable. First, Guidance 152 appeared in 2003. This guidance recommends a risk assessment approach to assess the safety of new drugs intended to be used in animals. Almost a decade later, Guidance 209 came out in 2012. It limited antibiotic use in food producing animals to only the usages needed for the health of the animals. Most notably, this definition excludes the use of growth promotion. Under this guidance, the use of antibiotics for the purposes of growth promotion is no longer recommended. This guidance also says that medically important antibiotics, the ones we use in human medicine, should only be used under veterinary supervision. This addressed a common practice at the time where many antibiotics were being sold over the counter. One year after that, Guidance 213 came out in 2013. This essentially provided a guidance for industry to comply with the recommendations set forth in Guidance 209. Importantly, this also detailed the process for companies to change use claims. In other words, drugs that were previously labeled for growth promotion could have their use claim changed to disease prevention. In fact, many drugs that were previously only labeled for growth promotion are still being used under the usage claim of disease prevention. Finally, we have the Veterinary Feed Directive Final Rule. A veterinary feed directive, or VFD, is essentially a prescription for drugs administered in animals' food or water. This is a common method of drug administration for large populations of animals, where individual administration of drugs is just impractical. This document provided a regulatory framework for implementing the previous guidances. It also required that a veterinarian client-patient relationship exist in order to dispense a VFD. So are these current regulations enough? I would personally say no. Although growth promotion is discouraged, disease prevention indications, which are usually low dose, are still allowed. Additionally, many drugs that were previously labeled for growth promotion have changed their use claims under Guidance 213, a process that required no further safety or effectiveness data. The same drugs at the same dosages that were used for growth promotion are still being used under the label of disease prevention. Other countries have attempted to regulate antibiotic use in agriculture. One of those countries is Denmark, and we can learn from their experiences. Denmark has a monitoring and research program called DANMAP that monitors the use of antimicrobials in both animals and humans. They phased out growth promotion uses of antibiotics gradually between 1994 and 1999. One important aspect of the Denmark regulatory experience was their recognition of the importance of the veterinarian. For example, they implemented a tax system for veterinary drugs, where there is a higher tax on medically important antibiotics and lower taxes or even tax exemptions for other preventative measures like vaccines. As you can see in the figure, vaccines are tax exempt, while critically important antibiotics are taxed at a rate of 10.8%. One concern for opponents of regulation is that it would harm industry. That simply hasn't been seen in Denmark. As you can see in the figure, the purple and blue bars represent the amount of antibiotics used in pigs, which has decreased by more than half since 1994. All the while, the number of pigs produced, represented by the orange squares, has steadily increased. The industry continues to flourish even in the face of regulation. And now for my personal recommendations. This is a complicated issue with many, many stakeholders, all of which need to have a voice in the regulation process. Antibiotic stewardship programs in human medicine need to grow and continue to address issues with prescribing practices in human medicine. And finally, importance needs to be placed on medically important antibiotics when examining agricultural practices. Ideally, medically important drugs should be reserved only for the actual treatment of disease, and all subtherapeutic dosing would be eliminated. That's all for now. Feel free to like the video and leave any comments or questions. The next few slides were the sources I used for the presentation and its associated paper. Thanks, guys.